He'd been working the same hospital corridors for 20 years. Quiet, humble, just another night shift janitor finishing his rounds. But when the explosion victims arrived in the emergency room, Robert did something that shocked every doctor. Because the man they knew as a janitor was actually the most experienced combat surgeon the battlefield had ever seen. Welcome to Hidden Warriors. Before we tell you the story of the janitor who became a lifesaver, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us honor the heroes who serve in silence. St. Mary's Hospital looked the same every night at 11 p.m. Fluorescent lights humming in empty corridors, the distant beep of monitors, and the soft squeak of Robert Mason's cleaning cart wheels on polished linoleum. He'd been walking these halls for 20 years, invisible to most, essential to all. Robert was 63, with gray hair kept military short and hands that stayed steady despite his age. He wore the same navy blue janitor's uniform every shift, with Robert stitched in simple white letters above the pocket. To the day staff, he was reliable. To the night shift, he was family. To the hospital administration, he was just employee number 4,847. But Robert moved differently than other janitors. His cleaning was methodical, precise. He didn't just mop floors, he sanitized them like contamination could mean death. When he cleaned the operating rooms, he handled the equipment with a reverence that spoke of understanding, not just maintenance. The surgeons who worked late sometimes noticed him. Dr. Martinez had caught him once, standing in Oregon 7, looking at the surgical instruments laid out for the next day's procedure. There was something in Robert's expression, not curiosity, but familiarity, like he was seeing old friends. "You ever work in medicine, Robert?" Dr. Martinez had asked. "Something like that," Robert had replied, then quietly returned to his cleaning. March 22nd started like any other Tuesday night. Robert clocked in at 11 p.m., received his assignment sheet, and began his rounds. The hospital was quieter than usual, just a few patients in the ER, routine surgeries scheduled for morning, nothing that suggested the night would become anything other than ordinary. But at 2:17 a.m., the emergency radio crackled with a code that changed everything. Multiple casualties incoming. Industrial explosion at the chemical plant. ETA 4 minutes. All available personnel to ER immediately. Robert was cleaning the third-floor recovery ward when he heard it. For most people, it would have been background noise. For Robert, every word triggered muscle memory he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. He abandoned his cart and headed for the elevator. Not because it was protocol, janitors weren't part of emergency response, but because Robert Mason had heard those same words before, in places where the difference between life and death was measured in seconds, not minutes. The elevator doors opened to chaos. 6 victims, burns covering 30 to 60% of their bodies, chemical exposure, smoke inhalation, the kind of trauma that required immediate surgical intervention and expertise that went beyond normal emergency medicine. Dr. Martinez was triaging, trying to prioritize who could be saved and who was already beyond help. The trauma surgeons were being called in, but response time was 8 minutes minimum. In burn trauma, 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours. That's when Robert stepped forward. "Doctor," Robert said quietly, appearing beside Dr. Martinez. "Robert, not now. We need you to clear." "The patient in Bay 3, Robert interrupted. "His airway is compromised, but it's not from smoke inhalation. Chemical burn to the trachea. You have maybe 90 seconds before complete respiratory failure." Dr. Martinez looked at Robert, then at the patient. The man was conscious, breathing, talking to the nurses. He didn't look like an immediate priority compared to the others who were clearly critical. "How do you? Bay 4 needs immediate debridement, or you'll lose him to infection before you can get him to surgery. Bay 6 has internal injuries you're missing. His abdomen is rigid, pupils are starting to dilate. Massive internal bleeding. Dr. Martinez stared at Robert. These weren't observations a janitor could make. These were assessments that required years of trauma experience, intimate knowledge of emergency medicine, and the kind of battlefield triage that most doctors never learned. "Who are you?" Dr. Martinez whispered. But Robert was already moving. Bay 3 first. He could see what the others couldn't. The subtle swelling, the slight color change that indicated chemical damage to the respiratory system. He'd seen it before in Afghanistan, when IEDs mixed industrial chemicals with explosive force. "I need a size 7 endotracheal tube, surgical lubricant, and someone to assist," Robert said, already scrubbing his hands at the emergency sink. "Robert, you can't." "Doctor Martinez, that man will be dead in 60 seconds if someone doesn't secure his airway. You can file complaints later." The moment Dr. Martinez looked into Robert's eyes, he understood. This wasn't a janitor making suggestions. This was a surgeon taking command. What happened next was 20 minutes of precision that nobody at St. Mary's had ever witnessed. Robert moved through the emergency room like he'd been doing trauma surgery his entire life. Because he had. Bay 3. Emergency intubation performed with textbook precision. Bay 4. Rapid assessment and immediate intervention that prevented septic shock. Bay 6. Identification of internal bleeding that the initial triage had missed, allowing the trauma team to prioritize surgery that saved the patient's life. But it was more than just medical knowledge. Robert knew how to work in chaos. He knew how to prioritize when everything seemed critical. He knew how to make life and death decisions without hesitation, because hesitation meant people died. When the trauma surgeons arrived, they found Robert standing quietly beside the sink, washing his hands. 6 patients stabilized, airway secured, bleeding controlled, surgical priorities clearly established. The kind of triage that usually took a full trauma team working in perfect coordination. Dr. Rodriguez, the head of trauma surgery, looked around the ER, then at Robert. "Sir, I need to understand what happened here." Robert dried his hands carefully, the same methodical way he cleaned everything else. "Emergency triage. Patients are stable for transport to surgery." "Sir, this is battlefield medicine. This is trauma surgery at a level that—" Dr. Rodriguez paused, studying Robert's face. "Where did you learn this?" For the first time in 20 years, Robert allowed his mask to slip. "Kandahar Province, Forward Operating Base Chapman, 2001 to 2008. Combat Trauma Surgeon, 75th Ranger Regiment." The ER went quiet. Everyone who'd been working frantically stopped and looked at the man they'd known as Robert the janitor. Dr. Martinez found Robert in the break room an hour later, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, still wearing his janitor's uniform. "Dr. Robert Mason," Martinez said, reading from his phone. "Combat trauma surgeon. 7 years deployed. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, combat medical badge, credited with saving over 400 combat casualties." Robert looked up. "That was a long time ago. You're a board-certified trauma surgeon. Why are you working as a janitor?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "When I came back, I couldn't. The pressure, the decisions, the responsibility. I'd saved so many people, but I'd also lost so many. I needed something quiet, something where I could help without the weight of life and death in my hands every second. But tonight was different. Tonight, those people needed what I used to be, not what I've been trying to become." Dr. Martinez sat down across from him. "The hospital needs to know. You can't go back to mopping floors after what you did tonight." "I like mopping floors," Robert said simply. "It's honest work. It helps people. And until tonight, it was enough. And now?" Robert looked toward the ER, where the patients he'd stabilized were being prepared for surgery. Now I remember why I became a doctor in the first place. 6 months later, St. Mary's Hospital had a new director of emergency trauma. Dr. Robert Mason still showed up every night, but now he wore scrubs instead of a janitor's uniform. His nameplate read, Dr. Robert Mason, M.D., Trauma Surgery, but everyone just called him Doc. He kept some of his old habits. He still cleaned his work area with military precision. He still showed up early and stayed late. He still treated every patient like their life was the most important thing in the world. But now the young residents followed him around, learning trauma techniques that weren't taught in medical school. Combat medicine, battlefield triage, how to save lives when resources were limited and time was running out. The hospital board offered him administrative positions, department chairs, opportunities to lecture at medical schools. Robert declined them all. He wanted to work nights, in the ER, where the ambulances brought the broken and the bleeding. Why? Dr. Martinez asked him one night. You could write your own ticket anywhere. Robert looked around the ER, the same place where he'd mopped floors for 20 years, where he'd finally remembered who he was meant to be. This is where people need help, he said simply. This is where the work matters. Some heroes wear capes, some wear uniforms, and some wear janitor's clothing for 20 years, quietly serving, waiting for the moment when their true calling becomes clear again. Robert Mason had spent 2 decades cleaning up messes. Turns out, he'd just been practicing for the messes that really mattered, the ones where cleaning up meant the difference between life and death. The hospital corridors still echo with the sound of wheels on linoleum, but now they belong to a gurney carrying someone whose life was saved by a man who never forgot how to heal, even when he was just trying to disappear. Because sometimes the greatest service comes not from never falling, but from remembering how to rise when people need you most.